If you have been the victim of abuse by a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, you might be eligible to apply for a VAWA. There are different types of VAWA. You can be abused by a U.S. citizen or green card holder spouse. You might be abused by a U.S. citizen child. If you are a parent with a U.S. citizen child and suffered abuse, you might be a child with a U.S. citizen parent or a green card holder parent, and you've suffered from abuse, you might be eligible to apply for a green card in VAWA on your own without the help of your abuser. My name is Pratibha Agarwal. I am an immigration attorney. We're based in Washington, D.C. We've helped hundreds of clients file successful VAWA applications and VAWA self-petitions. And I want to share with you some of my best advice on winning your VAWA case. Let's get started. First, let's get into who can file for a VAWA self-petition. So there are several folks that qualify to be able to file. The one thing to remember is you can do this without your abuser's knowledge or their involvement in this application. You could receive a green card without your abuser's knowledge or involvement in the entire application process. You can file if your abuser is a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. You can file if the abuser is a U.S. citizen child. So if you're a parent with a U.S. citizen child, they've been abusing you, they've been talking back to you, threatening you even, you might be eligible for a VAWA self-petition and perhaps even a green card to go along with that VAWA self-petition. If you are a child with a U.S. citizen parent, that's another relationship that might help you qualify for VAWA if you are experiencing abuse in that relationship. But you also need to show, in the case of marriage cases, that the marriage was entered into in good faith with the intention of building a life together, not for immigration purposes. Now, we want to know that you entered into this relationship hoping to build a life with this person, not just for immigration purposes. Another key element is shared residence. So we have to show that you lived with your abuser, and this is for all types of relationships, parent-child, or marriage-based relationships. For marriage-based VAWA, you will need to show that you lived with your abuser during the marriage. So this is a change in policy that recently occurred within the last year. You will need to show that you lived with your spouse during the course of the marriage in order to qualify for VAWA. All applicants have to demonstrate good moral character. So lack of criminal history, lack of criminal convictions can help you. This does not mean that you might not qualify if you do have a criminal charge or a criminal conviction. We will still have to evaluate whether we can demonstrate good moral character. So for example, if you had a traffic citation, this happens, you will still likely qualify for VAWA. We want to build up your case and make sure that we have other evidence of good moral character. Sometimes a crime is entangled with being abused, right? Maybe your abuser forced you to be a prostitute or to commit another kind of crime. And that will also be taken into account in evaluating good moral character, which is necessary for a successful VAWA self-petition. And then, of course, most importantly, we want to show that there was abuse in that relationship. That abuse does not need to be physical. The government considers emotional abuse, psychological and verbal abuse. Sometimes that can be more powerful, that can be more harmful than physical abuse alone. Some of our clients have both. Some of our clients only have emotional abuse, and that is still okay. We have been successful with many, many VAWA applications with only emotional abuse, so do not deter that being a reason from applying for VAWA. You will also need to show that your abuser is either a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. So our firm does this through either the naturalization certificate of the abuser, if you have it, or the birth certificate of the abuser showing where they lived. In some cases, we're able to rely on the marriage certificate that will often list where your spouse was born, if this is a marriage-based VAWA. So it's some kind of proof that the abuser is a U.S. citizen or that the abuser is a green card holder. If you don't have that information, we have also been successful in asking USCIS to review their own records to identify whether the U.S. citizen or green card holder spouse actually has that status. you want to know before you ask, right? You don't want to file your VAWA application without knowing that. So just keep that in mind. It is a required step. We can certainly ask USCIS to verify the status of the abuser as a last resort, but if you can provide any kind of information, usually identity information, birth date, place of birth, perhaps, right? If we can provide some information, this will help facilitate USCIS's ability to verify whether your spouse is a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. But in the best case scenario, if you have the naturalization certificate or you have the birth certificate of your spouse, this can be helpful to show that they are a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. Of course, this also goes for parent-child relationships, your child's birth certificate or your parent's birth certificate if they are the U.S. citizen or green card holder abuser upon which your VAWA application is based. Another thing you need to do for a successful VAWA application is to prove your relationship was made in good faith. This is most important for VAWAs based on an abusive spouse. So if you're filing for a VAWA because you've been abused by a U.S. citizen or a green card holder spouse, it is really important to show that you entered your marriage in good faith with the intention of building a life together. Often this is done in the form of an affidavit, usually just from you. We provide detailed information about how you met, your dating, how you decided to get married. If you had a wedding ceremony, people attended, we'd like to provide that information as well. If you have other proof of maybe even having a wedding ceremony, perhaps traveling together with your spouse, if you invited folks over to your home or told others about your marriage, if you even did a video call with friends and family, they've been able to write affidavits, the third-party affidavits showing that the marriage was real and entered into in good faith with the intention of building a life together. That's an important aspect of the VAWA self-petition. If you are a parent or a child, you can show your birth certificate listing this abuser as the parent or as your child, right? If you can demonstrate that through the birth certificate, and that's usually enough. School records might be helpful as well, or other information listed showing the parent-child relationship. That is also very helpful. Remember that same-sex marriages also count for VAWA. If they're considered legal where they occurred, then they're perfectly fine to apply for VAWA for same-sex marriages as well. And that's often something common that we see as well in same-sex relationships. They're treated exactly the same way as heterosexual relationships for VAWA eligibility. One thing to remember is that your application is confidential. So the government has taken steps and has enacted regulations to ensure that your application remains confidential. The government is not supposed to be reaching out to your spouse. They're not supposed to be providing information about your application to the abuser or to anyone else, and therefore it is confidential. This application can move forward without the help or the involvement of your spouse. Another thing you need to prove for a successful VAWA self-petition and perhaps even a green card is to show that you lived together with your abuser. So remember, in the marriage, you have to show that you lived together with your spouse during the course of the marriage. So you have to show that you lived together with your abusive spouse during the course of the marriage. In the case of parent-child relationships, you also need to show that you lived with the abuser at some point, ideally through, the time that they were 21 or over. If you're applying based on a U.S. citizen child who's 21 or over, we want to show that you lived with that child during their adulthood, that they were abusive during that time. Same thing with if you're filing based on a parent, an abusive parent, you have to show that you resided with this abusive parent. So this can be done through various types of documents. The most common ones, especially for people that may have been on a lease together, is your lease, or if you own property together. Of course, that is strong evidence that you did live together at the shared residence. Utility bills, school records, medical records, driver's licenses with the same address, insurance documents. So these are all different things, even pay stubs with your address. If you don't have documents with both of your names together, those documents will be the strongest. You can show with separate documents, perhaps two different driver's licenses with the same address, looking at the issue date. Is this during the course of your marriage or during the course of your relationship? That can be helpful to show that you did live together with this person. Keep in mind that there is no minimum requirement for how long you have had to live together. So short stays together, as long as you were living together, as long as both of you considered that home your residence, then that should be sufficient based on the current regulations to show that you did live together for purposes of VAWA. You also need to provide evidence of abuse. This is one of the most important parts of your VAWA application. Remember, VAWA is based on abuse. VAWA is based on different types of abuse. So you can show battery or physical abuse, but you can also show something called extreme cruelty. Extreme cruelty can be demonstrated through an affidavit from you. If you have affidavits from friends and family, that can also be helpful. We have been very successful with our VAWA applications where abuse is documented through a detailed affidavit provided by you. Our firm works with you to help prepare that affidavit. We will do a call with you, and your job is just to be truthful and provide as much detail as you can remember. We'll be asking questions to help you remember all of the different types of abuse that might have occurred in your relationship with your abuser. So we'll be taking notes. We help you draft that affidavit. You review that affidavit, make sure everything is truthful and accurate. We caught it properly, and that we, understood properly what you were telling us. So that's very important to do. But your personal affidavit is one of the strongest pieces of evidence to show that you qualify for VAWA, to show that you've been abused. Other pieces of evidence can include affidavits from others, maybe that have witnessed yelling or humiliation, either in private or in public. Maybe also a psychological evaluation. So in some cases, we send you to get a psychological evaluation. A psychologist can evaluate you and determine whether your symptoms align with other victims of abuse, and they will put that into their report, which can be submitted to USCIS. Police reports, restraining orders, anything like that can also be helpful to show that you've been abused. Remember, if you don't have physical abuse, it doesn't mean that you won't win your VAWA case. All types of abuse are considered for purposes of VAWA, and this can include emotional abuse and things like name calling, yelling, humiliating, isolating you from friends and family, threatening to deport you, threatening to deport your children. So these are the types of things that could qualify as abuse for your VAWA self-petition. So even if there is no physical abuse, you still can win your VAWA case. Another requirement is to show that you are a person of good moral character, right? Another requirement for a successful VAWA self-petition is to show that you are an individual who is of good moral character. And often what you need to show is a lack of criminal history. So most of our clients don't have any kind of criminal history. We send you to complete a background check. So we'll gather your fingerprints. We'll get a background check from the FBI if you've been living in the United States for a bit. This FBI clearance record will be something that's included in your application. It shows, they run your fingerprints and it shows what charges you had, and often it shows the disposition. So maybe you got into a fight with your spouse, they called the police, and it shows that you were charged with domestic violence, but then it was dismissed because there was no evidence. So that's important to show in your FBI report to show that you still are a person of good moral character, that you haven't been convicted of anything. If you recently moved to the United States, you might want to gather police clearance certificates from any place you've lived 6 months or more outside of the country since the age of 16. So that's another really important piece of evidence that can help show good moral character. If you're involved in the community, if you've supported your family, if you have friends that can attest to this, that can be helpful as well. But in my opinion, the strongest pieces of evidence are your FBI clearance report and also any police clearance certificates that you might have from abroad. For marriage-based cases, it's really important to show that you entered into the marriage in good faith with the intention of building a life together. You have to have gotten into this relationship with this person with the intention of building a life together. I know some of us have arranged marriages. Some, are introduced through friends and family, that's okay. If you didn't have a long dating history, that's okay. It's okay to explain culturally, this is how marriages work in your family, in your community, and that's perfectly okay. But we just want to make sure that we explain that. That's usually done in a detailed affidavit with any other supporting evidence. So if you bought jewelry for each other, engagement rings, had an engagement party, had a wedding ceremony, photographs can be helpful there as well. And any other financial commingling is going to be the strongest pieces of evidence to show that the marriage was entered into in good faith with the intention of building a life together. If you have children together, obviously the government can't really argue that that marriage was not in good faith. If you have children together, obviously you submit the birth certificates of those children to show that this was a real marriage and it wasn't made just for immigration purposes. Your personal declaration, your affidavit, it is one of the most important pieces of a successful VAWA self-petition. This should outline, how did you meet your abuser? Where did you meet them? When did you meet them? Who asked whom out? Did you date? What types of things did you do when you were dating? You want to provide details about your relationship. Did you celebrate certain holidays? Did you travel together? Did you meet each other's family? What other shared experiences did you have? These are all very important pieces of information that can be helpful for a successful VAWA petition, because it shows that you entered into that marriage or you entered into that relationship in good faith with the intention of building a life together. This affidavit should also talk about you living together. When did you live together? Where did you live together? What were your addresses? Who lived with you? If that's relevant, if someone else lived with you. You can also talk about the residence. Was it in a residential area? Was it in the middle of the city? And what did it look like? How did you use your shared space together? So all of these pieces of information can be helpful to show that you live together with your abuser. And then, of course, we talked about abuse. You want to go through and remember as much as you can about the abusive behavior. So did they call you names? What happened when they got angry? You have to really sit through, try to get as much detail as you can and provide that in your affidavit. So this affidavit is really important. It should be, you might need to go over it a few times. You might need to think through it and include as many details as you can remember, but most importantly, be truthful, right? This is your story. This is your statement to the government. Be detailed and be honest. Talk about how it made you feel. And, of course, people feel embarrassed or ashamed that they were a victim of abuse. So this is not something that anyone will judge you on, but this is your opportunity to tell your story about what happened and the abuse that you suffered. So final tips for successful VAWA self-petition, and possibly also for a green card for those that qualify. Just know that your application will be kept confidential. Your abuser is not involved. They're not notified. They don't have to speak about you at all in this application process. What you want to also do is, if you're submitting multiple forms and an affidavit, cross-check and make sure that the information you're providing is consistent. Sometimes it's hard to remember dates. Sometimes it's hard to remember as best as you can when things occurred or whatnot, or sometimes typos even occur, right? So just make sure you double check your application, that everything is truthful, it's accurate, and consistent. Look for inconsistency. If there is an inconsistency and it makes sense and it's correct, then explain that inconsistency. I met them at this time, but this was the first time I saw them in person. We got married. We had 2 wedding days. We had a religious marriage and we had this court marriage. So it's important to make sure you explain inconsistencies or provide details so USCIS doesn't find an inconsistency where something may not exist. Make sure you use the most recent USCIS forms. These editions change often, so really important that you use the most recent forms. If you have the luxury of working with a lawyer, with an immigration lawyer, highly recommend that you work with an immigration lawyer if possible. You can call our firm. We've handled lots of VAWA cases. Again, 703-348-1663. Keep your application organized. Make sure it looks professional. It looks clean, it's easy to follow, and you will have a successful VAWA self-petition. If we can help you, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, I'm Pratibha Agarwal. I am an immigration attorney, and I help clients with all types of immigration cases. We're based in Washington, D.C., but we help clients all over the United States with all types of applications. So feel free to reach out to us, 703-348-1663. Thank you.